Andreas, can you give us or a client an idea what to expect in a prep session?
That's a very common question, and it's a long answer. So, first of all, preparation, there's a couple reasons to do preparation, the most important of which is to set the intentions for the journey and to basically create a rapport between the facilitator and the client. So there won't just be one prep session in most cases, there'll probably be three, and each one has a specific intended purpose. The primary reason for preparation work is to set an intention for the client. So in other words, why are you doing this? What are your goals? And also to really prepare for neurogenesis and neuroplasticity to occur during the session. And then a second goal is for the rapport between the facilitator, myself, and the client. And that is extremely important. And the real goal there is to make sure there's an established trust between myself and the client, and basically walking into the journey understanding that everything's going to be okay. So I'm going to repeat that the goal of this trust building is so that when we're in the journey, if I'm asked the question in the journey, that you believe the answer, that I'm telling you the truth, and also that you believe that I have your best interest in mind.
Do you ask the clients a lot of questions, or let me phrase it this way? Should a client in a preparation session plan to answer a lot of questions?
Yes, there'll be a lot of questions asked and answered, and every facilitator does preparation differently, so the way the questions get answered are going to vary. The process I take is more of a non sequitur type of process where we'll talk about various things in a natural flow, and the goal is really to get an idea of where you, the client, are at from a mental standpoint, mental health standpoint, from a physical standpoint, and from a standpoint of how you feel about the actual process itself. And we'll talk about the requirements that the state has in terms of questions being answered, and we'll talk about some other kinds of processes as well. And I think the really important part about the entire prep process is whatever questions you are asked, you can answer them as you see fit. This is a non-directive program, which means I don't tell you what to do. You do what you want to do. You work on this. You may be prompted or have suggestions given to you, but ultimately your responses, you answer as you see fit. So we're not going to delve into, your trauma unless you bring it up, but the goal here is for you to explore yourself. And as a facilitator, I'm there to understand where you're going in the journey potentially, so that I can, be ready and prepared to assist you and help you holding the space as necessary.
How long are preparation sessions?
Preparation sessions that I conduct are generally 1 hour long. They're conducted via Zoom, or if you're in town or local, we'll do them in person. We can also do the preparation sessions in person if you're out of town when you get here, with the caveat that we cannot have a preparation session shorter than 24 hours in advance of your administration session. So if you wanted to do a prep session in person prior to the journey, you need to do it 24 hours in advance of the actual journey itself.
How often are preparation sessions 2 or 3 hours?
That's very infrequent. Generally, we respect the time of the client so that we would cover that long of a session. We definitely cut short and then suggest to continue onward on another day. You do as many preparation sessions as you feel, as the client and I feel, that we're ready for the journey. And in most cases, that's going to be 2 or 3 prep sessions. If you look at prep sessions in the context of having everything that's required for the state paperwork explained, that's going to be 20 or 30 minutes. And there are many pieces of paper that you're ultimately going to end up filling out. And so that all needs to be explained and covered. There are things such as what kind of music are we going to listen to? Are you going to have a guest in the room with you during the journey? Are you potentially going to be taking medications in the journey? There's a bunch of questions like that, and we cover all of them. So about a third or half of one prep session is going to be just those kind of questions. Then there's the questions about, have you ever had psychedelics? Are there any traumas or events that might come up in the journey that you want to talk about? Are there things that trigger you or make you upset? These are other kinds of state questions that are required. So you generally talk about those things. And that covers the state's requirements. Then there are the things that I personally, as a facilitator, cover with clients that maybe some other facilitators don't. Typically what we'll do is we'll have a little bit of an overview of nonviolent communication as a lens to look at experience through. So we cover that. We'll talk about music selection, which is extremely important. We'll talk about journaling, and journaling is vital. Not mandatory, because again, it's not a directive program. You can choose to do what you like. What we find is that clients that journal prior to the journey are more likely to journal after the journey, and journaling is the most flexible, best tool I have ever found and most clients have ever found for exploring their inner self. So we'll talk about journaling.
So dosing is a very big question, and as mentioned in other videos, it is discussed between facilitator and client. And often clients have concerns, possibly for medications that they're on. And with preparation, I'm sure this is obviously where it is discussed. Can you give a brief overview of how you approach dosing for clients so they have an idea prior to a preparation session?
That's a very, very good question. And you only get a number of choices, like 5 choices when you come to do services. You get a choice of the service center, you get a choice of your facilitator, you get a choice of a primary dose, and you get a choice of a secondary potential dose. Dosing is a topic of every prep session, and even potentially the day of the journey. And the selection of the dosing is vital because the majority of people that come to me have never tried a psychedelic before. So how in the world could they know how much psilocybin to take? So we look at a couple different perspectives or dimensions to make the dosing choice. The first one is just based on research. 25 milligrams of psilocybin gets the average person in a research study to the place where the benefit of psilocybin comes through. So say it's treatment-resistant depression, 25 milligrams of psilocybin helps many people overcome treatment-resistant depression. For end-of-life anxiety, 25 milligrams of psilocybin helps with end-of-life crisis. So 25 milligrams is a good baseline starting point. The majority of clients that come and visit me are taking SSRIs or antipsychotics. Those tend to blunt the effect of the journey, and so the way that's usually overcome is with a higher dose of psilocybin, let's say 35 milligrams. So the targets are going to be 25 or 35 based on research. Then there are other dimensions. How afraid are you of the journey? Many people come here are extremely anxious about having a bad trip or having something horrible happen during their journey. And that would indicate maybe a lower starting dose to become comfortable with the experience. And then at a later point in the journey, maybe an hour, hour and a half in, boosting that up. That's what we call a boost. Some people come from far away. They've suffered with depression for 30 years and they want to be healed. And so they don't mind if they're going to have a problem or a difficult journey for a few hours because they've been struggling for 30 years. So that would tend to a higher starting dose. Some people are exceptionally sensitive to medications. Well, that might be a lower starting dose. All those dimensions we talk about at every prep session. So by the time you come to Satya with me as a facilitator, you've had that conversation at least 3 times. And it's a very interesting conversation, and clients really enjoy it as well. So, it's a good question to ask.
Oftentimes we're asked about music during a journey, and if the client can bring their own music or if we provide music. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, music is super important. Research shows that. There's a research study that says if the client has a strong connection to the music and mystical experience, that is indicative of great outcomes. So music is half of that equation, is very important. The music choice is up to the client. So it's your choice. And the facilitator can DJ and play what they think you might want to hear. They can play a soundtrack that you specify, that you create, or they can play other music. And those are the three choices. So typically, as a facilitator, I don't DJ because that indicates that I would know what should be played for you in a given moment. And in your journey, I have no idea what is going on in the client's mind. I'm taking notes and recording, but I really don't know what's going on. So the idea of me knowing what to play for you, it adds an agenda into the mix. And for me, I don't feel comfortable having an agenda. I'd like to have this be as non-directive as possible. So where I typically recommend to the client is to choose one of the psychedelic soundtracks out there. And there are two notable ones. There's the Johns Hopkins soundtrack, and there's the Imperial College of London soundtrack. And the reason I like those so much is there's an agenda that was created for those soundtracks, and that agenda is to create a structure for the journey. And you have researchers that spend a lot of their time thinking about what the best way to create that structure is. They test it, and it's what's been used in all of the journeys that have the remarkable outcomes. So I feel like it's really hard to go wrong with the Johns Hopkins soundtrack or the Imperial College of London soundtrack.
Do you think it's a good idea for clients to bring their own music or to listen to those Imperial College or Johns Hopkins University soundtracks, or that it's something that is new to their ears for the experience?
I think that's a really good question, and it's a subjective question. There's some people that say you should never have heard the music before. There's some people that say it's good to be familiar with the music. And I really don't know the answer. I think it's really up to the client to think through that. What we do know as facilitators, as a best practice, is that music with lyrics is usually distracting, and generally people ask to have those turned off unless they're in a foreign language. I think the other important thing is during the journey, if you want the music louder or softer or quieter or off or repeating songs or skipping songs, you just tell the facilitator, they'll do exactly that. But in terms of whether you should listen to them in advance, that's up to you. And it's something to think through and decide for yourself.
Do you have any suggestions for clients that are very nervous, even scheduling their first preparation session?
Yes, it's normal to be nervous, and it's a good response. I always tell clients that, here you're probably coming from 3,000 miles away to a city you've never been to a building you've never been in, to meet some people that maybe you've talked to for 3 hours or 20 minutes. You're going into a room with them for 6 or 7 or 8 hours and taking an amount of psychedelics that will take you to the edge. What could possibly go wrong with that? So a normal response is to be nervous and to have some apprehension. And that's why the preparation sessions are so important, because by the time you walk in the door with me as a facilitator, you're going to trust that the words coming out of my mouth are true when we talk, and that I have your best interest in mind, and that you are going to be safe no matter what. And that's part of the process of the preparation sessions, is to alleviate that. Again, coming back to the initial point, it is absolutely normal and a good sign to have nervousness about this process and a little bit of what I call healthy apprehension, because that means you understand you're doing something very profound. The more work you put in to the prep, the more likely you are to have a good outcome. I'm a real believer in, this idea of the law of sowing and reaping, or, what comes around goes around. Work always comes with a reward, and the prep work, journaling, considering nonviolent communication, meditation, mindfulness, getting out into nature. These are all prep steps. The more of that you do, the more likely it is you're going to have a good journey. And I personally believe the reason why is all of the exercises that you can do in prep either foster neuroplasticity or neurogenesis. And the reason people come and visit us at Satya is to have an experience that leads to neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. Psilocybin is like a supercharger of both of those kind of things. You can work on those aspects before you come, and then afterwards you'll have a much better chance, if you continue pursuing the kind of work you did in prep after the journey, to have the changes last and stick. So my suggestion is give yourself some time to do the prep, maybe a week or two before you come out here. You can come out here 3 days in advance if you want, but you're probably a little bit better off coming out earlier.
What is a best practice for the amount of time from speaking or choosing your facilitator to coming into Satya Therapeutics for the day of your journey? Meaning, what do you see as the best amount of time for a client in preparation?
That's an excellent question, and I would suggest that the optimal time is 1 to 2 weeks in advance. Some people come with 3 days notice and the process works, but that's really rushing it, and I don't think it's good to rush something as profound as a psilocybin experience. Some clients take 3 months to do prep, and that works great too, but 1 to 2 weeks, I think among the facilitators that are working here, that's considered a best practice, is 1 to 2 weeks of prep.